bonjour, j'aimerais commencer par me présenter.
I'll, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Francis Riendo.
The acting GCCIO, and then the Assistant Deputy Minister at TBS for Digital Policy. So in one way or another, I've been connected to the important topic we're talking about today, which is digital ID, for a number of years. Bienvenue à la 7e activité de la...
Welcome to this series on the new economy. It's a partnership between our school and the Center for Innovation and International Governance. I'd like to mention a few issues. You have simultaneous translation in the language of your choice, and you've received the texts that will be read today.
Has been a topic of discussion within the Government of Canada, but also within countries around the world for a number of years. Shaping Canada's digital identity landscape is a task shared by many levels of government, as well as external stakeholders like DIAC, private sector organizations. There are many groups around the table who will be key partners for getting it right in Canada. We've assembled what I think is a fantastic panel today, and this should be a really good discussion. Our panelists bring expertise from the private sector and other levels of government, and we can expect them to expand on federal conversations around digital identity in ways that are both complementary and thought-provoking. Of note, this panel isn't designed to give you the official view of what digital ID should be for the Government of Canada, but rather to expose public servants to some leading thinkers from other levels of government, business, industry, and representative associations. First, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by identity and what we mean by digital identity. At a very basic level, we all understand the concept of identity. We're born and our parents give us names so that when they call out to us, we know that they're talking to us. At the same time, we're given one of our first government issues identity in the form of a birth certificate. Later on, we start accumulating other types of IDs, things like our passports that allow us to travel, or a driver's license that allow us to, for example, get into a bar. Some of you may have even experimented or seen people experiment with early sort of forms of identity fraud by using a fake ID to get into a bar. So in some ways, we've been around identity for all of our lives, and they've been an important part of our life that we don't always think about. But more and more, as we move into a digital age, we are moving from paper-based identity to electronic forms. You're accessing your banks online by using passwords. You may have bought a coffee recently by using a form of biometric assurance and using your iPhone to pay for your coffee. Some of the transactions you're doing might not be very sensitive. For example, if you are reserving a camping site and not having to pay for it through the Parks Canada website. Others require a more important level of assurance, and the consequences of identity fraud can have serious repercussions. And so as more and more of the interactions between government are moving online, the capacity to identify and validate an individual's identity electronically is becoming increasingly important. This is an issue for governments around the world. There's some nations already having well-established national digital ID ecosystems. The GOC and the Government of Canada has been making efforts in this space, and I would venture to say developing what we can consider to be a Canadian approach that's anchored in our own federal reality. I'm sure you'll hear more about this from some of our panelists. For many countries, a sound approach to digital identity is a foundational platform to moving the interactions between government and individuals to the digital reality that reflects the expectations of citizens in the 21st century. Today, we have the benefit of being able to engage in conversation with some leading experts in the field of digital identity, and I look forward to the conversation. Introducing our panelists, I would first introduce Joni Brennan. Joni is the president of Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, or DIAC. She's more than 15 years of experience in digital identity innovations and standards development. Today, she's driving the development of an identity trust framework, contributing to international committees and standards organizations, and building strategic partnerships across the public and private sector. Next, Colleen Bolden. Colleen is the Director of Digital Lab and Digital ID programs with Service New Brunswick. Colleen has a long career in information technology and experience in private sector, academia, and government. Currently, Colleen is responsible for digital identity programs with Service New Brunswick and is leading efforts on the Smart Province initiative to leverage technologies to accelerate the integration, development, and growth of digital solutions in the public sector. And next, Colleen, and next I'd like to introduce Debbie Gamble. Debbie is the Chief Officer of Innovation Labs and New Ventures at Interact. Debbie's work focuses on mobile commerce, digital identity, and cryptocurrency solutions. She's recognized as a leading authority in the digital economy and has been widely recognized for her work in the fintech sector. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Andre Boyson. Andre is the Chief Identity Officer at SecureKey and a senior fellow at CIGI. He's recognized as a global leader in digital identity, privacy, digital transformation, and blockchain. Andre is an active contributor to the digital identity community and serves on the boards of identity standards organizations such as DIAC and the Cantera Initiative. The panel today, so just a note that the panel will be using WooClap to pose a few questions to the audience and to receive your questions towards the end of the event. The instructions to access WooClap were sent to you to your email and also appear on screen. The access code is JAN12, so JAN 12, all capitals. And why don't we warm up with a first question on WooClap. And the first question we'll ask to all our participants to get to know you a little bit is, how familiar are you with digital identity? Connaissez-vous bien l'identité numérique? So your options are very, somewhat, a little, or none at all. And we'll be looking to learn a little bit more about you. And so we see the results are moving a little bit. But we see we have a small portion of the audience that says they know quite a lot. The vast majority are saying they know quelque peu ou un peu, and a small portion don't know about digital identity at all. So context for our panel members today. We have an audience that varies quite a bit in terms of its understanding, from the quite a lot to the not at all, with the majority of our participants today having some notion of digital identity, but looking to enhance their knowledge. So with that, we'll move straight to the presentations. And our first presenter will be Joni.
Thank you so much, Francis. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks to all of you for participating in this important discussion today. And I'm really thrilled to be here. As the slides are getting pulled up, I also am thrilled that we have in this panel today not only the experience that was discussed, we also represent from Canada one coast to the other. So good morning to all of you from the early morning here in Vancouver. And we've got Colleen Bolden out in New Brunswick on the other end of the country. So it's a real thrill to have that coverage. So I think you folks are going to put up my first slide, so you can do that as soon as you're ready. Great, thank you. So I wanted to start by covering what identity is, and in a broad brush strokes, and really focus on one of the top priorities here about the why of identity. And that is really on the economic impacts that solving digital identity can bring to Canada. And so there have been numerous studies that have been done around the world, and generally we find that there is around 3 to 6% of GDP that can be gained and realized into the Canadian economy by solving for the ability to verify people and organizations and relationships in between. How's that made up? It's made up through fraud reduction, through increased efficiencies, and through opportunities to create new and compelling services that all Canadians need to be able to use, whether they're in the busy, bustling cities or in the rural landscapes of Canada. So the economic opportunity here is massive. That's especially important when we need to get Canadians back to work and reopen the economy and keep the economy moving in times such as these with the global pandemic that we're working through. Next slide, please. And so in order to make this vision a reality, Canadians need to know what data exists about them, and citizens, governments, and businesses, they need tools to help people to manage proper sharing and verification of that information. Next slide. Now, it was great to hear the level of understanding that folks have with identity today and the concepts. And so we went out last year, and actually this is some 2019 data. And we asked Canadians what they thought about digital identity. And so let's go through what Canadians thought about digital identity. Canadians had some concerns about digital identity, and particularly, we're missing one slide here, but I'm gonna talk to it anyway. What Canadians were looking for is they do have concerns about using social media. So only 30% trusted social media sites to protect data about them. Now, what Canadians did have trust in was 83% said that they trusted governments to protect data about them, followed very closely by 81% who said that they trusted financial institutions to protect and manage data about them. So we have some strong foundations here for building solutions and services on top of institutions such as government and financial institutions and financial services. So let's talk about what does identity look like today. Next slide, please. Well, what identity looks like today really is that on the internet, we like to say that on the internet, nobody knows that you're a dog, which I think is a really good example of how the internet and identity behaves today. It's hard to prove that you are a dog. It's hard to prove that you're not a dog. And so we need ways to be able to verify people. So let's go through some key challenges here and put the next pieces of the slide up. Thank you. So in terms of the key challenges that we have for around the digital identity space and moving it forward. Particularly, we need the right market conditions to help create the ecosystem and the space to enable digital identity to move forward. And so specifically, we're talking about standards, the standards development space. Standards are not the solution for digital identity. They are tools to help solve digital identity move forward. And so there's important work being done to normalize and bring standards together, both from the Canadian perspective. And when we look at solving identity, well, the internet doesn't stop at the Canadian borders. And so we need to be working in the global ecosystem for how we solve for digital identity. And then another area that needs to move forward and innovate, let's say, is around the regulatory scheme. So we have some really strong foundations here, again, in terms of security practices, in terms of know your customer and anti-money laundering in the financial sector, as far as regulated industries. And so we know that we believe that there are some regulatory changes that our policies could benefit from to both enable digital solutions that work for Canadians and as well as reduce barriers for participation. So there's strong work that needs to be done there across the board. Next build on this slide, please. And then also promoting the right market growth. And so when we're looking at how digital identity moves forward, some of the things I'll ask you to look at and think about are, what are the sustainability? How are these solutions and services for digital identity sustained? Are they solutions and services that are fully inside of the public sector, funded through public sector means and sustainable through public sector means? That's one path forward for sure. And we might have an ecosystem as well with some commercial aspects for how that ecosystem is funded, whether consumers and citizens are funding there or whether we have private sector entities who are gaining value funding through those. And so there's no single model in terms of sustainability. And so you should look at, when you're looking at these systems, different kinds of ways of these systems would be sustainable. And last but absolutely not least, inclusion. So we have to ensure that we have the right inclusion in these ecosystems. So next slide, please. What this ecosystem looks like, and I think there are a couple of builds that you can do here for some pink bubbles. But what this slide really talks about is you should think about this ecosystem as organizations that are requesting data to be verified, and organizations that can verify that data. Now, what's most important here is you. You're in the middle, and so this means that you provide the consent, you provide the permission for these organizations to both connect with each other in a sense, to be able to verify data about you in a secure, private, and ethical way. Next slide, please. And you can keep going. There's a few bubbles. These are the kinds of data: your address, your income, your date of birth. So these are the kinds of data you might want verified. Thank you. Next slide, please. Perfect. So where is some of this work happening at? There is the organization that I work for is the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. We're a non-for-profit organization. When we're outside of Canada, people tend to get confused and think we're representing government. When we're inside of Canada, people think we solely represent the private sector. Neither of those are the case. We actually are a collaborative of public and private sector entities who believe that the best way forward is to work together here. So if you'd like to get involved, we'd be happy to speak with you. Next slide, please. And so that's the work that we're doing now. I would say that if you're interested in this space, something that you'll probably hear a bit about today is the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. This is a framework that points out to the different kinds of standards and practices that are required for digital identity. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. I'm excited today to share the virtual stage with this panel and talk about some of the high-level concepts of identity and where and how we can work together, public and private, federal, provincial, municipal, territorial, to move this space forward in a way that works for all Canadians. Thanks so much for joining us today, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thanks, Joni. That was great and very useful. So from the perspective of a national collaborative to the provincial perspective, why don't we move to Colleen now?
Hi, folks. Colleen Bolden from New Brunswick. I represent Service New Brunswick, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit about Service New Brunswick. We're a Crown Corp. We were set up probably about 10 years ago, and many mergers later, we are the shared services organization for the department or for the province of New Brunswick. So we do everything from IT and servers and applications right through to laundry and our service centers in all the regions. This set us up well for digital. Like every other province, we also have a digital strategy. In most provinces, you could just Google that and see it. I know most of you are in Ontario, and certainly Ontario's new digital strategy onwards has gotten a lot of press lately. So you'll be able to find all of that. But I want to focus on SMART and the Smart Province Initiative. That digital identity was announced about 5 years ago, and we went through a proof of concept and a production pilot, as well as naming it what it meant to us. So SMART, the term SMART comes from Gartner. Many of you would know about Gartner. And to Gartner, it is the highest level of maturity, digital maturity, where your tell us once approach is predominant. So you provide your information once and it's shared across various applications. It's also about interconnected jurisdictions as well as interconnected within your own province. So it's very, very different than just an e-form that you fill in online and potentially just have to print. It is the highest level of digital maturity. In New Brunswick, we went to Estonia, prompted by private sector to go take a look at digital and how that might move the province's economic strategy forward. So that's the backdrop for SMART. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's in that vision for New Brunswick, the work of joint councils, the federal government, the policy gaps, and the collaborative roadmap. Next slide, please. So could you go back one? So in New Brunswick, we called it My ID. So it's a trusted digital identity, which is used to do things online that represents you as securely as if you were standing in front of me at a service center, asking to do particular service, like renew your driver's license. Next slide. So what we looked at is I am who I say I am. And if for many of you who know that anything about digital identity, that's a common way to describe it. I am who I say I am. You know, Wendy's standing at the counter or Wendy's coming on online. Wendy is who she says she is. It's a single source for New Brunswick citizen identification. It does mean we have to re-engineer and leverage current systems because we do not have the luxury of throwing out our legacy systems. And every government would be in that same boat. However, Estonia, the poster child for digital economy, was able to start from scratch when they broke off from the Russian government. So we need to develop architectures built obviously on a very strong match between privacy and security and built to pan-Canadian standards. Next slide, please. At the national level, it's all about collaborating together, sharing lessons learned, respect obviously for privacy and security and client choice, as Joni mentioned. But governments have a key role because we hold foundational evidence of identity. So in provinces and territories, that's our vital statistics registries. It's proof of citizenship. For immigrants, it's held in IRCC, and those immigration papers that prove they're a Canadian citizen or a landed immigrant. And for the highest level of trust, we need to prove citizenship because that matters to Canadians, and our Confederation gives rights and freedoms based on citizenship. Obviously, we need to collaborate, and it's not going to happen overnight. Folks, this really is a marathon, not a sprint. We have to be able to issue credentials and trust that we can use them across individual governments, but also I need to be able to trust something issued by BC or vice versa. New Brunswick credentials need to be trusted by other provinces. And then by extension across other sectors and then internationally. And the work internationally is being done through the federal government and the digital nations, but also through a lot of the standards bodies that are collaborating to help set up these ecosystems. Next slide. Here's a slide from my partners at Treasury Board. So you can see the federal government vision has always been to accept identity from the provinces, and also EIDAS on the right-hand side. That's the European Union standard, and there are many others. Obviously, banks and telcos play into this. And it's all about finding a way to trust each other's credentials and ensure the right level of proofs are presented for highly sensitive transactions. Next slide. So you're hearing a lot about hacking. So why is identity a key enabler, and what's changed on the perimeter? If you wouldn't mind tapping one more time. Thank you. So we used to be able to just put a firewall around it and everything was on site. And now that's not the case. Most of you are working from home. You're using mobile devices. Things have migrated to the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. You have partners at the table, vendors, contractors, and all of these endpoints have different requirements and tools to keep them secure. So as part of cybersecurity practice, there are many, many ways and tools being deployed to protect end users and corporate systems. Digital identity is one of those. So you've probably heard about multi-factor authentication, which is basically using more than one way to authenticate somebody coming in. Or you've probably heard of single sign-on, which is just, you know, a username. So today we didn't actually have to use a password to come in. It was a single factor sign-on. But there are many ways to protect. Digital identity ties you to foundational evidence of identity. It might tie you to driver's license. It might tie you to other things that prove you're you coming in. And then using the standards approach, we can tighten it up to match the level of sensitivity to the transaction coming on. Next slide. What's happening? So technology obviously is moving really, really rapidly, and individuals have adapted quite well, but we all recognize the rapid disruptive changes going on. Businesses tend to take a little longer. Public policy is longer again. So I would challenge each of you in your lines of business, you know your lines of business, you know your clientele. How can you use policy updates and modernizations for this new digital world? How can you help businesses and citizens and your clients adjust to this rapid change? And more importantly, leverage it to create new innovation, new GDP models, and really increase privacy and security, but it also allows you to increase throughput, efficiencies, faster service delivery, and ultimately happier clientele. One of the things that we've been able to do through collaboration at the national level is we have the White House Declaration, which was done by the clerks. And in some of the materials you'll see the link to GitHub on that. And that was signed by all clerks to collaborate on this new world of digital identity, and no province or jurisdiction left behind. We also created the first public policy document that was drafted to look at roles and responsibilities. Your federal government has the digital charter, along with work going on to make that, was brought into the House to make it a bill, and many, many policy instruments there. With the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, both Alberta and BC have gone through the first reviews around their digital identity credentials to allow those trusted identity credentials to be accepted by the federal government. And finally, at joint councils, this file is so important. It's seen as one of the top things that can improve service delivery to Canadians and businesses. So an individual was hired and sourced by joint councils, and that person will focus on digital identity. So lots and lots of work that has gone on. The public sector profile has been done to ensure that credentials accepted by public entities can be trusted, and what level of assurance. So all of these are progress. Next slide, please. So the roadmap at the national level is really about communications, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of collaboration. We share pilots, we share lessons learned, we look at what has happened, what we've learned, how it can be leveraged in other jurisdictions. Obviously, the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework is incredibly important. The public sector profile work at the federal level was led by Treasury Board, and that fed into the Standards Council of Canada and the DIAC work. Technology continues to be disruptive and changing, but technology really is the easy part of this very, very complex file. Policy and governance are key. And you can see the partners at the table. So again, it's all about collaboration. My colleagues across the country are all working on this and road mapping it. And there really is great collaboration between all levels of government in Canada, but also through the federal government into international areas of expertise. So that's it.
Thanks so much, Colleen. So going from perspective of a national organization now to the perspective of somebody delivering for a provincial government, we'll move to our private sector participants who are helping to shape the technology and the implementation of this. We'll start with Debbie Gamble. Debbie, over to you.
Thanks, Francis. Good morning, everybody. You might wonder what Canada's national payment system is doing, talking about digital identity. And I think, you know, some of the themes that you've heard this morning already are very key to us at Interact. So we've heard about, you know, the necessity for a Canadian digital identity set of capabilities, the necessity for collaboration, the importance of standards as we move forward on this. And I'd like you to think about the role of companies like Interact, and we'll hear from Andre and Secure Key in a second. But when you think about the path forward for digital ID, and certainly the path for digital ID as it relates to our economy, I'd encourage you to think about it as a journey around establishing that network, ultimately a network of networks. So as Interac have been a key player in the payments industry in Canada for over 37 years, we know a little bit about how to evolve a network and how to engage ecosystem players across the country in that collaborative effort. Next slide, please. So, you know, some key themes that you will hear us repeat throughout this morning's session is the importance of digital ID and why it matters, not just to, you know, a particular segment of the country, but to industries and to businesses across Canada and to each of us as individuals. The reality of the pandemic over the last 10 months or so has really accelerated the focus on the digitization of our day-to-day lives and the necessity for secure digital capabilities, including digital ID, for us to continue to work, to interact as a society, and to ultimately create prosperity across Canada. But it's not just about this creation of secure engagement for individuals. It is certainly to be able to prove I am who I say I am, as Colleen just mentioned, but it also is necessary for us to think about a secure ecosystem that we can trust as it relates to being able to secure relationships of entities to entities, and that includes machine to machine. So it is also about things, ultimately IoT, and also the delivering a convenient set of capabilities that are secure to allow Canadians to go about their day-to-day business. Next slide, please. So our current state, of course, we are relying on analog processes in many cases. And one of the key challenges for us as we're on this digital ID journey is kind of how do we enable and onboard people at the start of those digital journeys? We might hear a little bit more about that throughout this morning. But our current processes really do rely on that analog, in many cases, face-to-face experience of getting those credentials that we need to prove who we are and to go about our business. Many of the social networks, as you know, have created a convenient way to create identities, but these are not credentials that are secure enough for us to conduct businesses. So that what Canadians are really looking for, as Joni mentioned in some of the survey work that DIAC has done, and then I'll touch on some of the work that we've done at Interac, is Canadians are looking for secure ways of engaging in a day-to-day manner in a digital experience. So part of the journey that we are embracing is how can we work best together? How do we embrace the appropriate standards and collaborate to actually create that secure, convenient experience? Next slide, please. As Joni mentioned earlier, of course, this is critical to the vibrancy of our economy. And as we become increasingly digital, it is all about engaging with each other in a digital form and that kind of data economy. So it's about privacy. We've got to consider these conversations, not just around the digital identity, but it actually will morph into how we authenticate data, how we authenticate each other, and how we share data. And we need a common set of standards and policies to be able to ensure that whatever innovation is going on across the country, that we can maximize that for the greater good. And that requires us to have a balanced approach. So it most definitely means that we have to embrace those standards, but it also means that we need a set of processes for us to engage in those standards to actually deliver on the promise of the new digital economy. Next slide, please. So, of course, you'd expect somebody from the private sector to talk about why the private sector needs to be involved in these conversations. This absolutely needs to be a collaborative effort across the ecosystem, across ecosystems, and allow us to bridge those capabilities. And we need a common set of services for us to be able to accelerate the promise of new business engagement, new business models, new ways of digitizing the services that we offer to the marketplace. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the role that we have played in Interact over the past 3 decades or so around building a network. So one of the things that I think is going to be important for today's conversation is how do we actually, once we've kind of solidified the standards approach, how do we embrace those standards? How do we engage across the country, across businesses? How do we ensure that that approach is inclusive? And how do we ensure that it is governed efficiently so it can continue to grow? Next slide, please. When we look at the world of digital ID at Interact, it really does touch on some key initiatives across the country as it relates to our business. So payments, of course, the efforts around payment modernization across Canada, the efforts around data portability, data privacy, and even how do we take those analog experiences and move them to a digital form as we're grappling with our new normal around the pandemic. And in order to do that, we really need to champion digital ID as a catalyst to enable these new ways of interacting. Next slide, please. So we've also done a number of surveys over the past couple of years. There's a snapshot here. I'm not going to go through too much of this, but our research shows that, as Joni mentioned, Canadians see the opportunity, they see the benefits, but they're also concerned around security issues. So we've got work to do around education. Next slide, please. If you're interested in some of this data, we are more than happy to share this. You can go to developer.interact.ca or newsroom.interact.ca for more information. I'd encourage you to go to DIAC. We are also members of DIAC to be able to get more of that information. And we are happy to engage in conversations as this discussion progresses. Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie. A really interesting presentation. And now, last but not least, I would ask for Andre to move forward with his presentation.
Thanks so much. Merci à tous pour votre attention aujourd'hui. Je suis André Boyson.
Thank you for your attention today. I'm Andrew Boyson.
Already have that's in market today, something you may be familiar with called Verified Me. Verified Me is an example of a digital identity network that Joni, Debbie, and Colleen have already been talking about. Many of you will be familiar with the first generation of service used by GC that was called Secure Key Concierge, that is now called Government Sign-In by Verified Me. The first generation of service was a simple way for Canadians to access online government services using their bank login credentials as a convenience rather than having to remember a user ID and password that maybe they only use once or twice a year. The service has been operating now for 8 years and has over 17 million login credentials used by Canadians. It has also saved GC a lot of money over the prior generation of service. Verified Me takes the Secure Key Concierge service concept a little bit further, to allow you to prove who you are at online destinations that you choose. When you think about your own life, you recognize that you can't sign up for many services online. You can't get a new bank account. You can't get a new cell phone. You can't see your healthcare records, renew your driver's license or your passport. We can't do these things online because it's too risky. There's no way for the online service to know if it's really you. So we force people to come to a counter on the first visit so you can present your documents in person. This is what Verified Me is designed to do, is to take what we do in person that we know and understand and make it work digitally. To make it easy for you to sign up for these new services when you choose to, while also making it trustworthy and cost-effective for business, for all types of businesses, including government services. Importantly, it also has triple blind privacy to give Canadians confidence that limit how their information is being used. Triple blind privacy means when I use my bank account information to prove who I am online, the bank doesn't get to see who I gave the information to. And the service who receives the information, the government, the bank, telco, and healthcare, and so on, they know the information came from a trusted source, but not who provided it. In our network, which operates the service, we don't know who you are. So what this means is not the bank, not the government, not the service got to see a complete picture of the user journey. And it's this privacy model that's been so successful in making Secure Key Concierge successful to date. And it's designed for Canadians to work across the economy using the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework that Joni, Debbie, and Colleen have already been talking about. Next slide, please. So this picture explains how identity works in person today and uses it as a template for how we want to make digital services online better. The first thing to notice is that the bubbles on the left and on the right. On the left is a list of organizations that I already have a relationship with. And on the right are new places I want to obtain services, but I don't yet have. The pattern that we use today is I use the stuff that I have on the left, government documents, banking statements, utility bills, and so on, to get the new things that I want that are on the right-hand side. The second thing to notice is that it takes a village, as Francois said earlier, as trusted providers to make digital identity work. There is no single organization that solves the problem, and it is me, the user, in control of what documents to share. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. What I want to do is actually, let's compare the existing in-person experience and figure out what can be done to make the online service experience better. So, oops, and can we go back one slide? I apologize. So what's important here is, when you think about the in-person experience that we have today, what's important is that the destinations make the rules. Every online service makes its own set of rules, what you must have in order to get access to the thing that you want. But you as a user choose what documents you want to present. So when you come, perhaps you bring a passport and a bank statement. When I come, I choose to bring a driver's license and utility bill. Both of those are valid choices. And what you also see in this is that there's a plurality of providers. So each of us can show up with different things and still be successful to get what we want. And there is some privacy in this model. When I use my driver's license or a bank statement to prove who I am at a government service counter, the source of the documents doesn't get to see who I gave the information to. That's a good model. We want to keep that as we move forward. And it's already common business practice. Both users and businesses understand this model. Some of the things we want to overcome or fix as we get to digital identity, however, is we want to fix the problem of the oversharing of data. When I share my driver's license to prove my age as an example, they're getting way more information than I need. And if I'm using my bank statements to prove that I've lived in a province for several months, what they really wanted to know that I've actually have a living footprint in my province, and they didn't really want to troll through all of my banking details. And so we're oversharing data in those examples. And there's a document integrity challenge that we have today as well. When I present documents at a counter, the service counter has no way to know if the documents are real. You'll look at them and you'll examine them to see if they're internally consistent, and if there's any obvious signs of fakery going on. But in the end, if it's a well-forged document, you're really defenseless against that type of attack. So we want to fix that problem. And lastly, we want to make sure that it works everywhere I go as a user. So it's got to work in person, it's got to work online, it's got to work at the call center too. Next slide, please. So we've already heard Joni speak on the collaboration already happening in Canada between public and private sector and organizations on the digital identity file. In fact, each of the panelist organizations are active contributors at DIAC to bring trusted digital identity to life. And as Joni talked about, there are many organizations working together to make this happen across Canada. Canadians want and expect governments and businesses to work together to make online services easier and more trustworthy for Canadians. Next slide, please. And so this is an updated version of the file picture I just showed you. So this is the digital version of how we share documents. On the left, we have identity providers or relationships that I already have, trusted relationships that I've already gone through a registration process. And I want to use that information to share somewhere new to get something new that I want. In this fictional example that we have on the screen, I'm going to a sharing economy app, Millennial Apartments. And so I want to prove who I am because I'm trying to sign up for a new flat. And so here's an example of how the flow would work. I start with the Lily apps on the left. And the very first thing that happens if I want to prove who I am is verified me asks you to log in and prove who you are with your bank. And we're just doing this to prove it's you who's accessing the service. And then in the third panel at the bottom, you'll see Millennial Apartments is the thing that wants some information about you. And in the lower part of the screen, you'll see there's some detailed information they want. They want to see your bank profile, your name and address information. They want to see some information from your credit score. They might want to verify your government issued ID as well as verify your cell phone number. So if you're curious, you can click on those things to see exactly what information they're going to get. And if you're good to share it, then you click on confirm to provide your consent, and that information gets shared with Millennial Apartments. And what's good about this is we've been able to do this all digitally now. So it's more convenient for you as a user. And importantly for the landlord in this example, is that they know all of the information is real because it's been trusted and verified against the issuer at the time that it's being presented. So the information is real and it's being presented by me and not somebody else. Next slide, please. Here's two examples that I just want to share of what CRA has been doing in its roadmap to, oh, there we go, thanks. Here are two examples that I want to kind of go through quickly just to show you how CRA has been road mapping how it might use a service like this to provide services online. So in the times of COVID, we've got the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that's being delivered to many Canadians across Canada, and the government of Canada has done an amazing job of getting this out more quickly compared to other governments around the world who are also scrambling to provide benefits to citizens in times of COVID. So one of the challenges we have today is for government is that when we're signing up for emergency response benefits, if it's Andre, you want to get the benefit to Andre quickly and you'll need his bank account details, but you also have to guard against the fact someone pretending to be Andre and redirecting Andre's benefit to a fake bank account. And the challenge today is when a user provides banking information in an online screen on a web service, it's hard to know who that bank account belongs to. So here's an example of how I could sign up for a service to give Government of Canada confidence it's really me and that the bank account details really belong to Andre Boyson and not somebody else. So in this example, I can use my bank account to prove my name is Andre Boyson, and here are my verified bank details. And by the way, here's my government issued ID claim to show that this is Andre Boyson. So two different sources of identity. And again, this kind of models and picks up on what we already do in person. We use multiple sources of identity to confirm identity when you sign up for a new online service. Let me just show one more example and then I'll conclude. Next slide, please. Here's a different example, a different flow. Maybe I've got an existing banking relationship, but for whatever reason, I decide I want to have a new credit card from RBC. And so I've decided I want to take advantage of this offer that RBC has sent me. The challenge is I'm a small business owner and it's hard for me to prove my income because my T4 is from self-generated income. So RBC wants to verify my income data before they're going to give me this new credit card. Now I've got a relationship with my bank, so I can use that to help RBC have confidence I'm already inside the banking system. I've gone through a regulated process to prove my identity, but the gap here is proving my income. So now that I've used my banking information to prove who I am over at CRA's got confidence it's me. So now CRA can give me back my verified proof of income from my tax return last year. So I can then in turn take that over to RBC to prove that I am Andre Boyson. Here's my verified income as verified by CRA so I can get access to that new credit card I want. So this is an example in the first instance where CRA wants to consume data from a digital identity network. And in this second example I'm showing you now, here's an example where CRA can help me when I want to go get a new service somewhere else. And with that, I'm going to conclude. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Andre. So a lot to think about, a lot of information provided by our speakers today. We really want to get to questions from the audience, questions from all of you. We have the benefit of a highly knowledgeable panel. So there'll be a few questions from the moderator, but in the meantime, I would ask people to access WooClap to be able to upvote and provide questions you'd like our panelists to use. Again, the access code is JAN12, JAN12. And we will move to questions from the audience fairly quickly. But first, I want to pick up a little bit on something that Andre mentioned, which is around the role of the digital identity could play in the context of a pandemic. Arguably, all the people around this room are convinced of the value of digital ID. Arguably, also, we haven't necessarily done yet the great job of convincing our political masters and ministers of the importance of investing in this. So what is everybody's best sort of 10-second elevator pitch on why this matters, why we should be doing this? And then particularly in the context like today, where we are living through a pandemic, living in unprecedented time, how could digital identity and a proper digital infrastructure help us deal with future situations or future pandemics? I'm going to start and asking by Joni to take a first crack at it. Then I'll move to Debbie, Andre, and Colleen.
Thank you. That's a good and interesting question. I would say that anytime that you find that you want to do something digitally, online, by the phone, by the mobile phone, for example, or on your computer or your tablet, when you find you can't do it, that's an identity problem. Anytime you find that there's a high value transaction. And so if that's your healthcare information, I think we certainly would say that we feel safer doing a remote healthcare visit right now than going into an office. Having one place where we could view our medical records and be able to be more active in managing our own healthcare and more supportive as patients in teaming with practitioners and supporting our healthcare. That's a place where identity comes into play. So I think that the identity is important for the pandemic. Anytime you would need to verify someone, anytime you would need to also do supply chain tracking and management about how do we even get the vaccine to people? How many people do we need to get it to? Have they had it yet or not? Are they due for their second dose? All of those things require that we can identify this person and that this person can identify themselves, as well as identifying the organization and the entities and the practitioners along the way. In terms of making this, I think, more real, perhaps, for some of the folks inside of government, I would say that we really need to close the chasm of what identity is and what identity does. So when we're talking about identifying someone in order to get them the vaccine and do that tracking that needs to be done to deliver the vaccine and know where and how to distribute it, that's an identity issue. Knowing that the vaccine actually came from the company, that's an identity issue. But that said, when we're able to solve those baseline identity verification problems, well, if you think about Next Gen Pay, if you think about CERB delivery benefits, if you think about modernization of pension delivery, all of these initiatives and projects at the federal level all benefit from that same architecture, that same capabilities for solving digital identity. So what's so important here is that if we're able to solve the identity verification piece in the COVID context, we're able to then draw that out into so many other initiatives, because identity really is at the root foundation of any transaction that has value, that has risk, and actually does matter to people, whether that's personally or whether that's as an employee acting on behalf of some organization that they might work for.
Thanks, Joni. Debbie, same type of question. You're in the elevator with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. You've got the 30-second pitch as to why this should be a priority. What do you think it is?
I don't even think it's a should we. I think it's a how do we. I mean, the reality of our existence today is we are reliant on communicating and engaging. This is a perfect example of that, digitally. And so to do that, to touch on all of the points that Joni just mentioned, whether it be supply chain management, whether it be health management, whether it be education and how we're going to set up the future of our education system so that we are building the leaders of the future, and to enable business to grow. And of course, our economy relies on small to medium businesses. That's the backbone of our economy. And these businesses need to be able to work. They need to be able to conduct their business and engage with Canadians across the country. So my elevator pitch, it should be, how do we do this? And we're back to there. What's the plan to move this forward? How do we engage public and private sector entities? And what's the path for us to be able to allow our provincial and federal governments to work together with the private sector to get this in market?
Thanks, Debbie. And Andre, your 10-second pitch. Why senior ministers, officials should be paying attention to this issue. And you might be on mute, Andre.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Yes, thanks. The short answer is the problem with the digital identity infrastructure we have today is that it's easy for crooks and it's hard for all of us. And if we want to move this file forward, we've got to find to make it easy for all of us and hard for the crooks. So that's actually the really short answer. The challenge we have in times of COVID is that we're pushing more and more stuff online, which increases the amount of security required. The challenge is that users can't keep up with all these new security requirements and they're getting lost in the shuffle, which is actually increasing the attack surface or the risks that we face in online service delivery. So if we want to make this better, to have a true digital economy, we need to have good digital identity. What good digital identity is something that's simple for Canadians to use. It's accepted everywhere I go, and it's trustworthy and cost-effective for business. And most importantly, it's not something crooks can use. The challenge we have today is if the crooks have my data or your data, they can be online as you in 10 seconds pretending to be you. When we have good digital identity, they won't be able to do that anymore.
Thanks, Andre. Now, Colleen, on the same theme, but you're coming from a province. So why is it important, and why is it important for the federal government and provinces to be working together in this space?
Well, I guess I'd probably use an analogy. Can you honestly imagine operating today without a debit card or a Visa card? I mean, how many of us are even carrying cash because of the pandemic and cash not even being accepted in many areas? So some of these quick pivots have caused us to push things online faster, as Andre said, and Joni and Debbie. It's critical to a lot of the transactions that we have to do at a distance, but we don't have the tools in place. We don't have the Visa card that allows us to access all these services in a trusted way. And chip and pin is certainly part of what has solidified and protected and increased security and privacy. So to me, it's as simple as saying, you know, usernames and passwords don't work. Every day you open up the news and you say Facebook's been hacked or some other service that we all use. And, you know we need to do better. And it's this stacking of proofs of identity of who Colleen is that can spot abnormalities. And in the physical world, maybe my husband, I'll use Alan Foster from Forge Rock's analogy. He says, honey, you're not feeling well today. That's what your husband would say. You're not acting like you normally would. And that's what happens online when we stack proofs of identity and patterns go out of whack. As Andre said, you can identify quicker, faster, sooner that things are going awry and get them off. And that's really, really important in this new world where as we move services online, things move faster and faster. So we need some mechanism, and we don't have it today. We don't have that Visa card that allows us to access services. And digital identity really is like a Visa card.
Thanks, Colleen. Colleen, actually, in your remarks, you spoke about visiting Estonia. I visited them as well as other countries who've done good things around digital identity, like Belgium and Denmark and others. This is sort of a lightning round because I want to get to audience questions and a reminder that people can submit their questions through WooClap and Jan12 is the code. But maybe right back to you, Colleen. Have we fallen behind in sort of a lightning answer between compared to other countries in building a digital identity infrastructure for Canada? And if so, are there specific causes that you can think of which we may have fallen behind?
Yeah, New Brunswick did, as I mentioned, visit Estonia. It was a multi-party approach, which is a rare situation because we recognized early on that any initiatives around digital had to sustain themselves beyond any particular four-year period or party in power. So political support was really critical. In Estonia, again, they had the benefit of starting from scratch because they had broken off from the Soviet Union, and the EU actually provided additional funding for them to get their infrastructure in place. So they are the poster child for the digital economy. Having said that, they also did some work on laws around privacy. So no curious poking around, or the laws say very clearly you can't do that, and you will be there will be severe repercussions. I think our laws need teeth. I think we need to work on the policy, and I showed you that slide on the gap. The policy work is tough. It is complex and requires a lot of stakeholders. None of that is easy, and the political will is really critical. But at the end of the day, each of our folks on the line today are in different business units, and it still results back, or it still is incredibly important for us to understand that standing up digital identity is not the be all end all. It is the tool or the Visa card. And if I can't access anything online or do services online, it really it's useless to me. So each of the folks online are in different departments. They need to be looking at business cases where maybe they're not delivering the top level value to their clientele, and how they can look at what a roadmap might look like, because to improve it, we just don't have the benefit of a huge check coming our way. We need to take a proactive, systematic, overtime approach to moving increased services and efficiencies forward in our individual jurisdictions.
Thanks, Colleen. All right, I'm going to go Andre, Debbie, and Joni to close us off on this one. Lightning round: are we behind, and if so, why? Andre?
Yeah, I want to share a picture here. This is my brother-in-law, Eric, and he's an industrial mechanic. So he does all of the HVAC systems for the hospitals in Toronto, and he actually does the CN Tower too. He's holding his COVID certificate, a piece of paper that Ontario gave him. Now, he's very grateful to get his COVID vaccination, but they've given him a piece of paper. So how is this meant to work? He's going to go show up at a hospital. Now, the problem is the security guard at the hospital needs to understand, is this guy really Eric Spademan? And is this piece of paper real? So this is the same kind of thing we're seeing at every service counter. How do we rely on the information that's being presented, particularly in the digital economy? This is the challenge that we face, and it's the challenge of our time. We need to do this in a way that's simple for the person to present it and the receiver to be able to rely on the result, and to do it digitally and in person.
Debbie, same question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is actually about political will. So I think, are we behind? We're marginally behind. Some countries, we're certainly behind countries like Estonia that took the bold step to create a clean piece of paper and approach the world of ID and engagement from the digital perspective. But I think in Canada, we actually have a majority of the elements needed. You can tell by, the energetic conversation today. These conversations have been underway for many years. The organizations like DIAC, like the CIO Strategy Council, like Identity North, have energetic conversations with people who are eager to move this forward. So I think this is about how do we actually corral all of those elements, the public, the private sector, the policy, as Colleen mentioned, and use the analogy of, when Canada moved to chip and pin a number of years ago, it wasn't just standards that was necessary. It was an ecosystem that was working together to progress a roadmap to deliver the capabilities to the market. And I think the time is perfect for us to do that, but it actually needs some teeth as Colleen said, it needs political will to pull the various players across the public and private sectors together. And together, I am confident that, over a number of years, we can actually start to become leaders in the marketplace.
Thanks, Debbie. So, Joni, you've got a national organization that is playing a leadership role in this space. Is Canada behind when you look at your international comparators?
Yeah, I think so much. I really agree with all the panelists, and especially what Debbie just said, in that we need the political will, and that we do have, in talking about the energy that's there. When I first came to the DIAC, we had about 30 members, and now we're at about 90 members, of which the panelists here are sitting on our board of directors, all of whom have believed since at least 2015, if not before, that a significant and sustained investment was necessary, and a collaboration. It's more than standards, it's more than solutions, it's a full collaboration and the political will that's required. Now, to answer the question, is Canada behind? I think you have to say, behind in what? If we're talking about the specific implementation of actually being out there with our digital identities on our phones, through mobile, through in-person and mobile, we're behind on that. We absolutely are, and we need to move forward. If you talk about the commitment and the clarity of the vision, that this only works when public and private come together, that people don't live in a I transact with government only bubble, and they don't live in an I transact with the bank only bubble. They have a wealth of transactions, and that if we want to get security right, we have to do it as an ecosystem. If we want to get privacy right, we have to do it as an ecosystem, public and private. That space, we are ahead. We are the visionaries, and in that space, organizations from around the world have been looking at us and pulling from our DNA around how to get the public and the private to the same table. We have this moment, and if we don't act on it, though, we will be behind in that side as well. So we've got a mix there, behind in implementation, way ahead on vision, and now is the time to act and really put it into action and solve this for Canadians.
Thanks, Joni. So I'm moving to questions from the audience right now. Feel free, if you want to take a first crack at the question, just to lift your hand and I'll turn to you. Our first two questions are linked. The question is, what are the best measures, practices to ensure privacy is considered and protected when developing and rolling out digital identity? So a privacy angle. And then relatedly, knowing that governments and banks have been hacked and people's information stolen, how can we ever completely trust in anyone's ability to protect our personal data? So a combination of privacy and security concerns, and how do we address them in a digital context and with digital identity? Anybody want to take a first crack at this one? If not, I may just turn to Andre to provide us some insights first in this space.
Yeah, I've touched on this point already. One of the challenges today is the way identity works online is we ask a lot of questions. And this is manifestly the wrong approach for a couple of reasons. One is you're putting me, the real user, through an interrogation, and I get a little bit indignant when you don't believe it's me. But the reason services are asking me so many questions because they want to get a high level of confidence it's really me. And the way to do that is ask me lots of questions. And after I've gotten through enough information, you'll have enough confidence it's really me. The challenge at the back of that process is you have all my data. And now you are a target and a breach risk yourself. So what we need to do is find a way to do this without creating big honeypots of data, which is what we're doing online today. And if we can get to a place where we can trust a smaller set of information, but know it's reliable, we won't have to gather all the data. So first, it'll be easier for the user to accomplish. Two, you'll be able to trust the result. Three, you won't have all the data. And so then you don't become a breach risk yourself. And most importantly, where we need to get to is making sure that having possession of a user data alone is not sufficient to masquerade them in a transaction. So we need to get beyond asking questions and gathering information as a means to get confidence. We need to get to something only real users could possess, like a cell phone and a digital passport or driver's license. Only one is in service at a time. That will solve this problem.
And I think
I'd like to build on that too, if I may, Francis. I think we also need to kind of move away from putting our whole ecosystem based on the authenticity of some analog documents. So we can build some beautiful firewalls around various different systems. But if we are relying on a laminated piece of plastic to authenticate who we are, already we're at risk. So I think that kind of digitization of those foundational attributes, the things that we use to get the documents that prove we are who we say we are. So things like our birth certificate and our passports, etc. If those are digitized, and then we can use those to get further documentation and credentials, then it helps actually create a much more robust ecosystem. And using some of the technology that, frankly, some of the nefarious actors are using might help too. So it's very hard for us to kind of plug a hole when we're still basing the whole system on, as I say, an analog process.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm going to the next question, but then I'm going to ask
Francis, if I might just jump in before you move on. I think it's really important to understand what we've just expressed in terms of digitization. So I'll use a common example that many folks have rented an Airbnb. They're scanning a copy of their driver's license and sending it online to Airbnb to prove who they are. That's a form of digitization, but it's not what we're talking about. We're talking about getting a proof that I, as a citizen of New Brunswick, own a driver's license, and sending that from an authoritative source, which is only government, through a channel to a third party like Airbnb to prove I am who I say I am. Now, I'm not going to send my entire driver's license. I'm going to only send the minimum required. So it would be a proof. It might only be a checkbox that says Colleen has a driver's license. And so you think about privacy by design from the beginning of all of these analog processes. And what does true digital mean? Not scanning, not making a copy of what's already in play in the paper-based world. So I really want to make that distinction before we move on. Passports would be no different. Just because you scan it doesn't make it an e-passport. So
I think the other thing is too, people lean on driver's license because that's the only thing we have and that's the only thing we know. And driver's license is not defined as an identity document, but when somebody says bring your government issued ID, we all pull out our driver's license, right? In this ecosystem that we're talking about, when I think acceptance is important here too. And so we're thinking about, what do we require? What does Airbnb really require? They say driver's license because that's the easy one. If also they might be able to get a proof from your bank that you bank with, that you actually have an account, that you bank with this bank, that you pay your bills. I mean, they really want to be able to pay their bills and identify you. So they could also say, okay, we would accept a digital proof of your driver's license. We would accept a digital proof that you are a financial institution customer, signed by that financial institution. So there could be more than one way to fulfill that requirement, but all we have right now is driver's license. So that's what we do.
Thanks, Joni. So recognizing we have, I think, 3 minutes left to the session, I'm actually going to go right back to you, Joni, with a question. And people, if they want to add in, just lift your hand and final quick comments. Joni, one of the questions we have from our audience members is, how long, realistically, will it take before digital identity has a tangible impact on the lives of Canadians? When will they do a large majority of their transactions via apps or mobile?
Digital identity has a large impact on you now. So, you're already feeling that impact, whether it's, being able to do something new remotely, which might have come from COVID. I'm certainly finding doctors are much more receptive and able to see you remotely now than they were in the past. But the lack of it, you're definitely feeling the lack of it, and the user IDs and passwords that you have to manage, and the things that you can't do without going online. I have a family member who had COVID. She's having a hard time paying her bills. Nobody can come visit her to bring her the checkbook. She can't find anything. And the bank says, well, come in to see us. And that's not a solution, you know, especially with somebody who's getting over COVID. So you're feeling it now. There are networks that are in the ecosystem now. There are solutions that are in the ecosystem now. Andre talked about the Verified Me solution. Debbie talked about a network of networks, you know, leveraging existing capabilities. So there are pieces of the puzzle that are here now. I think that we will see more and more of that accelerated over this next year. I know there are some federal departments that have committed to new digital identity systems and solutions before the end of 2021. So I think we're just going to see incremental adoption and innovation using trusted technology that we've worked with over the next year to 3, and that will continue on forward.
Thank you so much. So that actually, I think, is a great note to finish on. That brings us to time. I really do want to thank all of you, Joni, Debbie, Andre, and Colleen, for the conversation. I'm sure we could actually keep talking about this for a while, because it is a fascinating and important topic, and it is about the government stepping into the 21st century. I'd like to invite our viewers to register for the next event in the New Economy series on Tuesday, February 16th. The event is on winner takes most economics and competition policy in the new economy. So another great topic from the Canada School, and what's sure to be an interesting session. Thank you again to all our speakers, and thank you to all of you for joining us today to discuss this.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so
for
much.
having us. Appreciate it.